Hello students, today we are going to discuss the poem Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. If we talk about the poet, Pablo was born in Chile and he was a very famous diplomat and a politician. And he's considered as one of the most influenced and widely read 20th century poets of the Americans. His real name was Neftali Ricardo Reyes Basualto. He adopted this pseudonym under which he would become famous while still in his teens. This particular poem, Keeping Quiet, was written in the 1950s and was published posthumously in the year 1974. In this particular poem, the poet talks about the need of quiet introspection and how this introspection influences our lives. Let's discuss about the poem now. The poet says, "Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for a second and not move our arms so much. It would be an exotic moment. Without rush, without engines, we would all be together in a sudden strangeness." So, the poet begins the poem on a note of meditation. He wants the people to have a brief period of silence. He has used the number 12, and this number could be associated with different things. It could mean the number of months in a year, or it could also mean the number of hours of clock. Both these things indicate that we are just drowning our time in the noise that we create continuously. He wants this human activity to be put to rest. He says, for once on the face of the earth, he says, one such moment on the earth should be there when no words are used. In that moment, we should not use any language. We have already learned, children, in the very first chapter, the last lesson, that language breeds linguistic chauvinism. So he wants that no language should be used, there should be silence, and only then peace would prevail, and only then negativity would vanish. It would just fade away. Then he says we should not move our arms so much. He means that, and he wants that the people should stop all movement, as it is this movement, the so-called mad race, the so-called rat race, to have a progressive outlook. This results in only unrest, violence in the world. And if such activities could be stopped, then there would be peace and tranquility all around the world. Then in the next stanza, he says such moment of silence would be an exotic one. It would be a blissful moment. It would be a splendid moment where no one would be in a hurry, and only peace and brotherhood and love would prevail all around. And this could prevail only through introspection and silence. He says there would be no rush, the moment would be without rush and without engines. What he wants to say through this is that it would be a strange moment. It would be a moment when there would be no noise. Because these days what we see the people are just involved in running here and there in a kind of a mad race, in a kind of a race to outshine others. So there is no peace anywhere in the world. So that moment where there would be no rush, no movement of engines, it would be an exotic moment and a moment wherein we would all stay together and we would all be together like brothers. And he calls this moment and he says that it would be a strange moment. Why strange? Because this moment people would have never experienced before. This moment would be unheard of, unfamiliar moment, a new and a novel moment. And he has used the poetic device, alliteration, in the last line in the words sudden strangeness. In the third stanza, the poet goes on to say, fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. So, in this stanza, the poet says that people will have more time. They would become conscious of the harm that they are causing not only to the others, to the environment, but also to their own selves. Through the example of fishermen, he is trying to say, he is using fishermen as symbolic of man's indiscriminate exploitation of nature for his own selfish interests. And he wants to say, and the man gathering salt is symbolic of, the entire mankind. And he wants to say that now in those moments of introspection, the people would have more attention to the suffering, the pain that he's causing to his own self, and he would have time to heal his wounds. He has used the words hurt hands, and hurt hands here imply man's self inflicted injuries, which are caused because of his involvement in destructive activities, in harmful activities, which man carries out thoughtlessly in his life. In the next stanza, he talks about the people who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire. Now, who are these people here? These people are the politicians, the scientists, and all the other people who are involved in aggravating war, in initiating wars. And they initiate wars against nature using chemical and nuclear weapons. And these kind of wars, what are they actually doing to us? They are actually bringing mankind to its dead end. And what kind of, he's used a paradox here where he talks about victory with no survivors. What kind of victory is there? It could be a victory of scientific knowledge, but there would be no survivors left to enjoy, to celebrate this victory. Then he says, in such moments of introspection, people would put on clean clothes. They would be fresh. They would have time to rethink, to have fresh approach towards life, and they would just try and put a stop to all the destructive activities, and there would be a feeling of universal brotherhood. The people would become conscious of universal brotherhood in place of violence. There would be peace all around, and they would walk around in universal brotherhood doing nothing. Nothing would be required to be done after acquiring peace. So this is all about this stanza. In the next stanza, the poet says, what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. In these lines, the poet says that whatever he is advocating, it should not be confused with laziness. He is not advising people to be passive. He isn't saying that life is static. He says life is what it is about. He means to say that life is an ongoing process. It is a dynamic process. And then he says, I want no truck with death. He wants to say that he wants people to live peacefully without worrying about death, as death is inevitable. It is an integral part of our lives. In the next stanza, he goes on to say that if we were not so single minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. He wants to say that people are just bothering about moving ahead. We have, such a busy life. In the name of so called progress, we have no rest, we have no peace. So, he wants that people should introspect. He wants us to self analyze, to realize what harm we have caused all around. And, perhaps, this a huge silence might interrupt this sadness. Why is there sadness all around? We have become, in the modern day, we have become emotionally bankrupt because of this rat race towards materialism. So we will get time if we will just stop, and if we will just introspect, we will try and understand the consequences, the results of our actions. And this can be achieved only if we introspect, if we stay silent, if we meditate. And we are just threatening ourselves with death. Our unthoughtful actions, what have these done? They have just wreaked havoc in the nature. This threat of death, it has been brought upon us through our own actions only. We ourselves are responsible for this kind of life. So this is what the poet wants to say in these lines. He wants to say that this threat of death, it has been brought upon man by himself only. So students, in the last few lines, the poet takes us towards nature and says that perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. And in the concluding lines he says, now I'll count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go. So in these lines, the poet stresses upon the fact that we have so much to learn from earth. The earth teaches us the lesson of preserving and of resurrecting life. Now you must have seen in the winter season, everything seems lifeless and everything seems dead and still. Everything seems dormant, but it is not. And later on, we see that it is full of bustling life. And this cycle of life, it goes on endlessly. Now the poet has achieved his purpose and he has presented his philosophy. Now in the concluding line, he leaves the reader alone to sit and to introspect and to experience this power which silence has. This is also the central idea of the poem, which reverberates at the end of the poem also. So he says that he leaves the readers and he wants them to introspect, and he highlights the ardent desire of his for everybody to be quiet, and he just his work is over, he has passed on his message and he goes away. So this is all about this poem. Hope you have enjoyed understanding it, listening to it. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.